making cabin fever crochet your tutorial destination for today. I hope you are doing really well and having a good day. And yay, it's here, finally, my winter baseball cap hat. And I designed this for a man or a woman. The brim does not need any type of stabilizer in it with the construction of it, and you can adjust the shape to how you like it. If you like a little more pointy in the center or a little more curved and rounded, you can certainly do that and it will maintain its shape. There are 3 ways that you can customize it, with broken down into 3 sections that I've done in the tutorial, with the cap, the band, and the brim. Now I did do a summer version with the different stitch for the cap. The rest of the construction is very similar, and on that hat I did put in a ponytail port for the summer hat. This one though, I did not want gaps personally for myself, so I just went with the solid all the way down so you can have the warmth down the back of your neck. But if you want to incorporate the ponytail port, you can use that summer baseball cap as a guide and can take what I did there and put it in here. You're certainly welcome to do that. I have the timestamp in the summer baseball cap, so if you want to go straight to that section with the ponytail port, that'll save you some time. You can do that. And then of course within this video I have the timestamp below in the description box as well, and within the video itself. And I did design this to go a little bit below past the ears and down the back of the neck to give you that warmth. If you make one and it comes out just a little bit bigger than you like, and you feel like it's coming a little too far down on your forehead, then you can just push it back on your head and bring it down over your ears and even a little bit longer in back. So that works out fine too. And I've made 6, a half a dozen of these already, and in different types of fibers and different weights within the number 4 medium weight range and this number 3 worsted, like I said, and they all worked out great for various head sizes too, from a man's head size, a woman's very small, and then mine, which I think is pretty like average, maybe to a little bit larger size. So anyway, that's that. I hope you will make it. I hope you will love it. And I do not have a written pattern yet, but when I can get to it, I will add that to the link below. You can always check my current patterns in my Etsy shop, and the link for that is below too. And the summer version, lighter weight version, is there. But you can, if you live in a more moderate winter climate, you can use a more airier, cooler type of fiber with this too. So this doesn't have to be in a wool or necessarily such as this, 100% superwash, or an acrylic such as that one. Okay, well let's go ahead and get started. All right, and now to begin, let's go over supplies, just a few, very basic. A row counter or pen and paper, something to keep track of your numbers as we work our way up, and for that reason also I recommend 2 to 3 stitch markers, and a tape measure will come in handy if you want to measure. I'm going to give you measurements as we go along, beginning with row 2, so that you can get an idea of your gauge and see how close you are to that with mine. And there is flexibility with this. You can be within a little bit of a range either way. And also you will need 2 hook sizes, a 5mm H hook and a 5.5mm I hook. And the yarn, stick with a range and a medium number weight for worsted type of yarn for the best fit. Today I'm working in this 100% superwash wool in willow yarn. They're daily worsted, and this is by Hirschner's company. Alright, so for every one, to begin, the hook size with the I 5.5 millimeter, unless you have a very small head, and for those of you that do will know it, then I definitely suggest going down to the H 5 millimeter hook, and you can stay with that hook size if you have a real small head throughout the whole hat. And this will stretch, you know, yarn stretches of course, so that will, if it comes out maybe just a little too small to begin with, it will stretch and accommodate your head over time. And then if you are using wool, you can always block that to fit too. But if you are an average ladies to a men's average, then begin with the I 5.5 millimeter hook, and then we're going to adjust for the ladies as we get more into the hat, go down into the brim. Okay, and I'll explain that as we go. Alright, so we're going to start with a magic circle or magic loop, and to show you how I do mine, if you're not real familiar, real comfortable with that, I take my tail, drape it over the palm of my hand, take the working end, the end that is attached to the ball of my yarn, and I go around the top, around the bottom of my two fingers, and cross over the tail. Okay, so here's the tail, just took the working end, made a cross over top. I will take my hook, go underneath that tail end, okay, and grab that working end that we crossed over and pull that up. I made the ring. Alright, and I'm going to bring my working yarn over, and then I chain one to lock that in. However, because we're going to begin with a beginning cluster stitch, a 3 double crochet cluster, this beginning chain will count as the first of 3 chains that count as our first double crochet. Alright, so that counts as 1, 2, 3. This is how we're going to begin our beginning cluster at the beginning of each round. Alright, so to finish that beginning cluster, yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook. Pull through the first 2 and stop. So you have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over, go back in the ring, yarn over, pull up another loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and now yarn over and pull through the last 3, and you have completed your first 1, 2, 3 double crochet cluster. Now chain 1 to lock that in. You can close up that ring just a little, but don't over tighten that. Alright, so now to finish round 1, we're going to create 5 more cluster stitches, 3 double crochet clusters. Okay, you ready? Yarn over, insert your hook in the loop, yarn over and pull up a loop. Yarn over, pull through 2. Alright, and now you're going to repeat this process 2 more times. Yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. Now you have 3 loops on the hook. 1 more time. Okay, pull through 2. You have 4 loops on your hook this time. Yarn over, pull through all 4. Chain 1 to lock that in. So it's only the very beginning cluster that you wind up with the 3 loops on your hook at the end, and you pull through all 3, and that is because of our beginning chain 3. Okay, so now we do this 4 more times of 2 clusters. Yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Again. Okay, there's 3. 1 more time, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1. Alright, so 3 more times. I'll do this 1 more time with you. Okay. And when you get your rhythm, it goes very quickly. And make sure, remember to do that last chain 1 after your last cluster, and now you can pull your loop closed. Don't over tighten because it's going to bunch up your stitches. Alright, so that was round 1. And try to remember to click your row counter as you go. Alright, so now for round 2, we are going to slip stitch to the top of the beginning cluster, not into the top of your chain 3, but it's that elongated stitch at the top of your cluster. Okay, yarn over, you slip stitch to the top of that, and then now we're going to slip stitch into the chain 1 space between your first cluster and your next. There's your chain 1, you're going to slip stitch into that. Okay, and then you're going to work a beginning cluster again, chain 3, yarn over, insert your hook into that same chain 1 space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Alright, so remember I said at the beginning you're only going to do that twice instead of 3 times, because we've already created our first double crochet part of the cluster with the chain 3. So you just yarn over and pull through all 3, chain 1, and then we're going to do an increase on this round and the next 3 rounds. So for this one we're going to place 2 clusters in each chain 1 space all the way around. So for round 1 you have 6 clusters, so now we will wind up with a total of 12 at the end of this round. Okay, so again into that same chain 1 space, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. You do that 2 more times. You'll have your 4 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1. So then now just work 2 clusters in every chain 1 space, and if you need to separate those stitches a bit, that's okay. Just make sure you put them in the chain 1 space and not into the top of your cluster. So go ahead and put 2 clusters in every chain 1 space all the way around. Make sure you do your chain 1 after each cluster, and again you will have 12 clusters at the end of round 2. So I'll work the next one, we'll do that together. Okay, again yarn over, insert your hook into the next chain 1 space, yarn over, drop a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, do that 2 more times. 1, 2, with the 4 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1. So there's 1 into the chain 1 space. Now work another cluster, chain 1. Okay, I will see you back around at the end of round 2. And I'm back around at the end of round 2, and I do recommend that you double check at the end of each round to make sure you have the correct stitch count. Okay, so now we're going to begin round 3, and if you would like to measure you can do that, but let's go ahead and slip stitch to the top of our cluster, and remember not to the top of the chain 3 but into the top of that elongated stitch that goes across the top of your cluster. Okay, and I have a measurement for you. If you are working in the 5.5 millimeter eye hook, this is an average worsted weight yarn. Okay, and it is a little bit, it's a little dense but a little bouncy at the same time, if you can see that, just to give you an idea on the type of texture that I'm working with and density. The diameter going across, should be approximately 3 inches, be a little over, which is, how many in the centimeters? That would be about 7.5 centimeters. Okay. Sometimes I don't like working right from the edge. I go to the 1 inch mark and then across. So that would be 1, 2, 3 inches. Okay, so now to begin round 3, we're going to do another increase. So this is going to be a 2-to-1 ratio, and that would be 2 clusters in the first, 1 in the next, 2 in the next, 1 in the next, 2, 1, 2, 1, all the way around. So we already slip stitched to the top of our first cluster. Now again, slip stitch into that next chain 1 space, chain 3 for your first double crochet, yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, do that one more time, yarn over, pull through all 3 just as we have been, chain 1, place another cluster into the same chain 1 space, and this time you have your 4 loops on your hook. Okay, chain 1. Now into the next chain 1 space, you're going to just work 1 cluster. Chain 1. Into the next, you will work 2. So if you notice, as we increase from one round to the next, your increase where you put your 2 clusters will land into the section where you have the set of 2 clusters together, and then your 1 cluster will land in between, and then the next set of 2 is where you put your increase, the next set in between, you have 2 on each side, you'll put your 1. Okay. Alright, so you put 2 clusters into the next chain 1 space, and 1 cluster into the next. Go ahead and finish these all the way around. At the end of round 3 here, you should have 18 cluster stitches, and I will see you there. At the end of round 3 now, so let's go ahead, slip stitch to the top of the beginning cluster. Okay, so I'm going to start from the 1 inch mark. So this puts me right about 4¼ inches. 10.5 to 11 centimeters. Alright, so that's with the I, 5.5 millimeter. And if you're working in the H hook 5 millimeter, that will bring you to around 4 inches or 10 centimeters. Okay, hope that helps. So now let's move on to round 4. And again, we need to go over to the first chain 1 space. We're going to slip stitch in to that space. Don't over tighten that slip stitch. You want just going to go nice flush across the top of your work without it gaping either. So with this increase, and we'll have one more increase round after this, the sequence is going to be 2 to 2. So 2 clusters in your first chain 1 space cluster, 1 in each of the next 2, 2 in the next, 1 in each of the next 2. Okay, again, chain 3, yarn over and work your first beginning cluster with the 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 3, chain 1. That's 1, 2, 3, your 3 double crochet cluster, and then create your regular cluster into the same space with the 4 loops left on your hook. Pull through a 4, chain 1, and 1 cluster in each of the next 2. Sorry, I hope I wasn't going too fast. You know, it's always going to be too fast for some, too slow for others. So I try to kind of get middle of the road here and cover my bases. Alright, so there is my first set of 2 clusters together as an increase, and my followed by 2 regular clusters. Alright, so it's my 2 and 2. 2 together, 1 in each of the next 2. That's our sequence all the way around. Alright, so go ahead and complete that. 2 into the next. 1. 2, and 1 cluster in each of the next 2 chain 1 spaces. Okay, 1 and 2. Alright, finish all the way around, and at the end of round 4 you will have 24 clusters all the way around, and I will meet you there. And here I am back around at the end of round 4. Slip stitch to the top of my beginning cluster and slip stitch into the next chain 1 space for our final increase round of round 5. Boop. And if you would like to measure, you can, but if your measurements are in the approximate range of what I've given you so far, you should be fine and good to go. But this will put you at approximately 5.5 to 5 3/4. That would be 14 centimeters, okay, approximately. All right, so now for round 5, our sequence is 2 to 3. So you're going to put 2 clusters in the first, chain 1 space, 1 cluster in each of the next 3, which brings you back to your set of 2 clusters where you place 2 clusters, 1 in each of the next 3. And you will do that all the way around. And when you come around, you should have 30 clusters. So we're increasing by 6 clusters with each round. Okay, so I will get you started again. Chain 3, work your first beginning cluster stitch, all right, where you yarn over, pull through all 3, chain 1, and then now work a regular cluster into the same chain 1 space. It's where you have your 4, yarn over, pull through all 4. Okay, chain 1, and then so there's your set of 2 and the first chain 1 space, and now 1 cluster in each of the next 3 chain 1 spaces. There's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and then that's your sequence all the way around. So 2 in the next, 1 in each of the next 3. I will see you back around. And here we are at the end of round 5. You should have 30 clusters all the way around. Okay, and this is the number you're going to maintain for the rest of the cap portion of our hat. So go ahead now and slip stitch to the top of the beginning cluster as we've been doing. We are going to begin round 6. So for rounds 6, 7, and 8, we are just going to place 1 cluster in every chain 1 space all the way around. Remember to then slip stitch to that beginning chain 1 space to put you in the position where we need to be, and then go ahead and work your 1 cluster first with that beginning setup cluster that we've been doing at the beginning of each round, where you yarn over and pull through all 3, chain 1. So now you're not going to do 2 because we're done with our increases, right? So then you just carry on and place 1 cluster into the next and the next and the next, chain 1 space all the way around, and at this point you will see the shape of your hat starting to curve in and create that bit of a bowl shape to fit your head, and it will do even more so on the next round too. Alright, so you're just going to place 1 cluster in each chain 1 space all the way around, again maintaining 30 clusters as you go. And at this point it's optional. If you want to place a stitch marker, you can, and I do that after my last increase round. You can either put it there, that's where I know that's where I did my last increase, and this is where I began, just above that, the rounds with just 1 cluster in each chain 1 space. So that way, in case for any reason I want to add or pull out a round for some reason, then it's just an easy visual, boom, I know, there it is right there where I did my last increase. Alright, so go ahead, 1 cluster in each chain 1 space around, 30 clusters at the end for round 6, 7, and 8, and I will meet you at the end of round 8. And here we are now back at the end of round 8, finishing the cap portion of our hat. Okay, so what I would like you to do, if you want to do one more measurement with me, fold it in half from the top center of the crown down and just press it down flat a little bit, make it a little easier for measuring, but just leave it as is, as the yarn just rests. With that, you don't want to stretch the yarn from top to bottom because we're going to measure the height. Okay, so at this point the height should be from the top center approximately 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters. Okay, so there's mine, measures just about right there. Okay, and before you start the band, this is where you can add an extra round or 2 of the cap portion if you need or want that a little bit lower on your forehead and come down a little more on your ears too. Go ahead though, grab a stitch marker, and I am going to switch yarns. We're going to work the band. I happen to have this. It's the exact same type of yarn in a solid color, and I like doing the contrasting. I thought that would look really nice, piping that in as a band. That's up to you. You can do it all one color, mix and match, whatever you like. Okay, so if you're making this for a man, go ahead and stay in the same hook size, the 5.5 millimeter eye hook. If you're making this for a woman, average size head, go down 1 hook size to your 5 millimeter H hook. Unless you have a lady's extra large size head or are working in a lighter, thinner, worsted medium type weight of yarn, then I suggest you might want to go ahead and stick with that eye 5.5 millimeter size throughout. And we're going to work single crochets. That is going to help draw in the hat a little bit, make it a little more snug, which the band portion of baseball caps usually are, to anchor them on your head. Now this is not designed to fit flush flat on top of your head like a beanie, but raised up just ever so slightly, as baseball caps tend to fit, but that's up to you. You can have it raised up a little if the height you wind up with a little bit of extra room, or you can cinch it down a little tighter if you want to, like a beanie, and that's going to draw it down more around your ears. But the length of this, I designed it to come down over the tops of the ears just to give a little extra warmth and coverage there also. I'm going to do 5 rounds of single crochet, and that's where you can make another adjustment. You can try it on your head. If you find that the band is coming down too low on your forehead, you can do 3 rounds instead, 4 or 5. So I would say after 3 rounds, go ahead and try that on and see where it fits, because we will be adding 1 finishing round after that, and it's going to add just a little bit more height around the entire hat, including the brim, when we are finished with that. If you're going to change colors like I am, then you will just slip stitch your new color in, or you can go ahead and slip stitch, if you're staying with the same yarn, to the top of your beginning cluster, not into the top of that chain 3, just as we've been doing. And every one, then we will go ahead and chain 1. Okay. And then we're going to place 1 single crochet into the top of every cluster and into the top through the chain 1 space, not around it, okay? Because that's going to, if you go around it, it's going to stretch that section and bring the height up and create a gap between the clusters. And so the whole point in having a cold weather hat is to keep the stitches as close together as possible. Alright, and then we're going to do 2 increases to get to the number that we want. So counting our 30 clusters plus each of the chain 1 spaces, there are 30 of those, we right now have a total of 60 stitches. So we're going to add in 2 more to give us 62, which is the number that we need to divide the section in order to create the brim to where it's going to land on the sides of your head and be spaced evenly in the center. Alright, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I've placed 2, 1 in my beginning cluster, 1 in the chain 1 space, and then next in the next beginning cluster and in that chain 1, which is stitch right next to it, the chain 1 we did at the end of the cluster to lock that in. Okay, so you do this around halfway, and on the 30th stitch place 2 single crochets. Alright, and then when you come back around to the very beginning here, then you will place 2 single crochets in the very last chain 1 space here. Okay, not in between and not in the top of your chain 3. That's your last cluster, your last chain 1. Place your last 2 single crochet there. I will meet you as I come around to the end and we will do that together. And I need to tie those off to keep those stitches together also. Okay, so 1 single crochet in every top of your cluster and into through both loops of every chain 1. At your 30th stitch, place 2 single crochets, and I will meet you around. When you come back around, double count, double check your count on that to make sure, because the stitch count on this is very important for the reasons I just mentioned. Okay, so I will see you back around the other side. Back around at the end of row 1 of the band. Okay, there's my second to last stitch, the top of the cluster, and here is my last stitch into that chain 1 and I'm going to place my 2 single crochets, and I hope you remembered to do that at your 30th also. Double check your count, make sure that you have 62 single crochets. All right, so now moving on to row 2, grab a stitch marker. All right, slip stitch to your beginning single crochet. So for this section on the band, I'm going to do a little bit of a trick that I came up with to help as much of a less visible seam as possible. Working the band does not work if you do it in one continuous round, because when you come around there's going to be a height difference, and we need them to be even for when we create our brim. But I did not want to have that very visible seam jog of doing a chain 1. So we're going to skip the chain 1. We're just going to go right back into that same beginning single crochet and place another single crochet, and then 1 single crochet in every stitch around. With your stitch marker, place that in your first, because we did not do the chain 1, so the height difference is much less visible. That way you'll see where you are when you come back around. Alright, so just go ahead and place 1 single crochet all the way around. Alright, and I will meet you back at the end of round 2. Okay, at the end of round 2, before we slip stitch, here's my last stitch, here is the beginning. Make sure you do not crochet into the slip stitch here. That does not count as a stitch. That's where we slip stitched and join. And when you do that slip stitch, if you want to cinch that down, that portion a little tighter, that's okay, because it will help make that even more seamless. Alright, so now we are going to work 2 more rounds exactly the same, and on our 5th and final round of the band, you're going to get your other stitch marker, and that's where we're going to do the placements for working the brim. Okay, so I'll take the stitch marker out for a second, slip stitch again to that very beginning single crochet, do not chain 1, just go back in and single crochet again in each stitch around. Make sure you put your stitch marker back into the first. Okay, so we're on round 3. Sorry about that. You see that? Excuse me, it's hard for me to see that in the camera. Okay, so round 3 and round 4 do exactly the same. Slip stitch to the beginning, do not chain 1, just go right back in, single crochet, 1 single crochet through both loops of each stitch all the way around, and you will be maintaining that stitch count of 62 single crochets. Okay, so I'm going to see you then at the end of round 4. And here we are at the end of round 4 of our band. I panned out a little bit so you can see the shape this is taking on. You can see how the cap is just slightly wider as intended, and the band cinches that in a little bit. And now moving onward to round 5. Okay, and we will begin the placement for our brim. Sorry, it was round 5. Okay, so get your other stitch marker. This is where you need 2, and you can also take out the stitch marker where I had placed that at the end of our last increase. Alright, so now for round 5, take that beginning stitch marker out. We're going to continue on just as we have been with 1 single crochet in each stitch. So there's that slip stitch, skip that, again slip stitch into that very first single crochet, slip stitch to join, Do not chain one, go back into that very same beginning stitch and single crochet. Okay, you can place one stitch marker in for now. So that's one, and then you need to single crochet in each of the next 14 stitches. Alright, so for a total of 15 stitches, 15 single crochets, one in each, counting the first, and in that 15th single crochet place your stitch marker. Okay, so that's one. We're going to do 14 more. 2, 3, 4, 14, and there's 15. Okay, take my stitch marker, put it in the 15th, and then double check your counting. Okay, so that's 15. Good. So now we are going to place one single crochet into each of the next 33, and then we're going to place our second stitch marker. So you can either take that out and use it. If you're more comfortable leaving it in, then you can just grab another one. You can get that third stitch marker you had in the body of your work. Alright, so 33 stitches across, place a stitch marker in that 33rd. There's 31, 32, 33. Okay, so I placed a stitch marker into my 33rd, and again double check. So you should have 34 single crochets from stitch marker to stitch marker. Alright, counting the stitches in the stitch marker. So before you continue on around to the beginning, double check your work. Alright. Okay, and there's my 34th, counting the stitches in the stitch marker. So you're going to have 14 stitches on either side of the center into the stitch just before the stitch marker, not counting the stitch marker. Because if you count it on this side, you'll be counting it twice, since we counted it from the long side, the front side, from stitch marker to stitch marker. If that makes sense, here's the back side, here's the center where we began. I just switched around my stitch markers there. So one single crochet in each remaining, so you should have 14 up to the beginning, and then counting that first stitch from where we started, you have 14 just before your first stitch marker. Here's the other side where we're coming around. Okay, here we go. Right back at the beginning again. You can take that stitch marker out, slip stitch to the beginning to join, alright, and now you're going to fasten off, okay? And then we're going to reconnect. So here's the back side of the work with the tail. Turn it around to the front, and with the stitch marker way over here on the right, if I could get in camera, this is where we're going to connect, and we're going to use both of these stitch markers as we work our brim. That's going to be important, help you keep your placement on that. So we're going to work this with 2 strands of yarn. Now we're going to be working in rows now, back and forth, for the brim of our hat. If you're already in the 5mm H hook for the ladies small extra small, then as mentioned at the beginning, you will continue with that for the entire hat. If you are doing the hat size that I am, which is for the average ladies to ladies extra large and the men's average, then we're going to stay with the H hook for the ladies, and if you are working the men's, go down to the H hook just for the very first row of the brim, because we're going to be working into the front loop only just for this very first row. With the smaller hook, I found that it helps keep the stitches together and from getting stretched out, and we will be doing a series of increases and decreases for the brim also, but we will go back to the larger 5.5mm after the first row. And we're going to connect into the first stitch marker on the right on the front side, so the long side where you have those 34 stitches from stitch marker to stitch marker. So you can go with whatever color combination that you like. I am going to combine one solid and one variegated. Just take your two strands together. It's going to be a little tight, but it needs that tightness to get that shape of the brim without any stabilizer needed. Okay, so row 1, take your stitch marker out, set it aside close by for just a second. You're going to need that again. Take your two strands and slip stitch through, leave plenty enough tail to sew that in a little bit later nice and securely. And now into the very next stitch, working into the front loop only, the loop that is closest to you, we're going to place one single crochet, alright, and one single crochet in each of the next 9. So that's 10 altogether, starting with the first single crochet. There's 1, 2. Now I'm going to go back and place a stitch marker into that very first single crochet. Alright, that's 2, 3, 4, 10. And just a little tip, when you are working these single crochets, try to keep them as flush to the base of your work as possible so you don't overstretch the stitches. Since they are worked in the front loop using 2 strands of yarn, thicker amount into a smaller stitch. Alright, now into the next stitch we will do one increase by placing 2 single crochet into the front loop only of the next stitch. And then now going across the front of the brim, we are going to place 1 single crochet in each of the next 10 again. One more increase, 2 single crochets into the front loop of the next, and then to work the side portion of the brim we're going to place 1 single crochet into the front loop of the next 10, and that should bring you up to the last stitch before your stitch marker. Okay. And in the stitch with the stitch marker, slip stitch through both loops. Slip stitch. And at the end of row 1, you should have 34 single crochets and 1 slip stitch at each end. Alright, so now we're going to turn our work. Do not chain 1. Going to turn. Okay, go back up to your I 5.5 millimeter hook for the ladies average to extra large and men's average size. Alright, as mentioned, with the ladies small, extra small, you can just stay with your same 5 millimeter hook. Okay, so I'm going to give this Furls Swirls a try for doing this tighter work. Now, we're going to skip the slip stitch, okay, and into the very first single crochet. Now we're working into both loops of every stitch all the way through the rest of the brim. All right, so into that first single crochet we are going to slip stitch. Don't work it too tight now, just do a regular slip stitch, consistent even stitches. Alright, and into the next stitch we are going to place 1 single crochet. Go ahead, take your stitch marker, put it back into that first single crochet. Okay? And on back here where we slip stitched at the beginning, it might loosen up a little bit, so if you want to, you can just to secure that for now, you can go down into a stitch, use a smaller hook if you need to. Just make sure you're not going through the other side. You can yarn over, pull through, and just make a yarn over, pull through again, make a little loop, and cinch that down and just let that hang out on the inside. I don't tie that in just yet in case I've made a mistake or have to pull back for whatever reason. Okay, we're on row 2. Okay, so now we are going to work 1 single crochet into each stitch all the way across up to our second stitch marker. Okay, and into the stitch marker you're going to place a slip stitch. Okay, and at the end of row 2 you will have 32 single crochets. Okay, so the wrong side, the inside of your work, easy, no increases. Okay, so I'm going to meet you when I untangle my yarn here at the second stitch marker at the end of row 2. Okay, I'm up to the end of row 2. I have 1 more single crochet to go, and I always double count at the end of each row, even as many times as I've done this. Still want to be sure, because the stitch count on this, is very important so that your brim is balanced and the front it's centered with the rest of the hat. Alright, so take out your second stitch marker, slip stitch into that last stitch, and always make sure that you are going through both loops and catching both loops of your double strand. Now for row 3. Alright, so every odd numbered row is on our right side, and that's where we will be working the increase. The even numbered rows on the inside is where we do no increase and we just work straight across. Alright, so now going to skip again that very first slip stitch, and it helps to cinch down the loop on your hook a little closer to the base also when you begin the slip stitch without chaining 1 to help avoid like a lump on the outside of your work. You're going to have a little bit of a lumpy loop on each first slip stitch, but don't worry about that because we're going to do a finishing round around the entire work, and that's going to clean up the edges and blend those really nicely. We just don't want it sticking out too far. So it helps to, again, cinch that loop down a little bit without over tightening. Skip the first slip stitch, slip stitch into the next, alright, and into the next. Work a single crochet, stitch marker, back into that first single crochet, okay, and work one more single crochet into the next 8. That's 9 single crochets total, including one with their stitch marker. Okay, so 8 more. Two single crochets into the next, and again working through both loops of each stitch. So now we're going to work across the top front center. We're going to place one single crochet into each of the next 10. And an increase, 2 single crochets into the next, and then 1 single crochet into each of the next 9, which should take you into the last stitch just before your stitch marker. Okay. And as before, we are going to slip stitch into the last. Okay, and at the end of row 3 you should still have 32 single crochets, 1 slip stitch on either end of that. Alright, so now to begin row 4, on the wrong side, turn your work, skip that beginning slip stitch into the next, and work 1 single crochet in each stitch across up to your last stitch marker, and into that last stitch marker you place 1 slip stitch. Okay, at the end of row 4 you should have 30 single crochets. Okay, 1 single crochet all the way across, and I will meet you at the end of row 4. Okay, I'm at the end of row 4, finished my last single crochet, placing a slip stitch in the very last stitch. Okay, turn the work. We're going to begin row 5. On the right side again, the increase row, skipping that first slip stitch, slip stitching into the next, which is your first single crochet, and then now we are going to single crochet across the right side of the brim, 1 in each of the next 8 stitches. Place a stitch marker back in that first single crochet. Alright, so that was 2. For an increase now, we are going to work 2 single crochets into the next, working across the front center, 1 single crochet in each of the next 10. Two single crochets into the next, and 1 single crochet into each of the next 8. Which brings you up to your last stitch marker, and again 1 slip stitch into that last stitch. At the end of row 5 you should have 30 single crochets. So now we're going to turn our work. Now we're on the wrong side again. This is our straight across row. Okay, you're going to skip the first stitch, slip stitch into the next, and place 1 single crochet across. That would be 28 stitches across with 1 slip stitch into your stitch at the end with the stitch marker in it. Okay, so I will see you at the other end of row 6, excuse me. And at the end of row 6, up to my last stitch marker, as always, we will place 1 slip stitch into the last, and again 28 single crochets with a slip stitch at either end. So now onward to row 7. So we just have 3 more rows including this, and then we do our finishing round. And as the brim starts to narrow in, we have less stitches and it goes faster and faster. Okay, so now we're on the right side of the work on an odd number, row 7, for an increase row. Skip the first, slip stitch into the next, which is your first single crochet, and then work 1 single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches now, which makes that 7 single crochets starting with the first. Okay, 2 single crochets into the next, that's right. 1 single crochet into each of the next 10. Two single crochets into the next, and 1 single crochet into each of the next 7. Again, that takes you right before your last stitch marker, and then place 1 slip stitch into the stitch with the stitch marker, and you will still have 28 single crochets on this row. Okay. Yay, we're on the home stretch. Kids of all ages. Are you still a kid at heart? I am. Okay, so slip stitch, boop, and now row 8. Trying to get this, there we go, to where you can see that. Alright, so turn the work. We're on the inside, the wrong side. Skip the first slip stitch into the next, which is a single crochet, and now we are going to single crochet in every stitch across up to your last stitch marker, and in that again you will place a slip stitch. So on this row you will have 26 single crochets. I'm going to grab that stitch marker. At the end of row 8, my slip stitch to go. Okay, now our final row for our brim, and then we will have 2 finishing rounds. Okay, so row 9, turn the work, and now we're back on the right side. Our last increase, as always, skip the beginning slip stitch into the next, and place 1 single crochet into each of the next 6. There are my 6 single crochets. Now 2 single crochet into the next, 1 single crochet in each of the next 10. Okay, 2 single crochets into the next, and 1 single crochet into each of the next 6. Your stitch marker out and place 1 slip stitch into the last. And at the end of row 9, you should have 26 single crochets. Alright, now do not turn your work, and we're just going to stay on the right side and then do our finishing round. See what I mean about having these little lump stitches on the left? That's going to get blended, okay? All right, we have finished row 9, our final row of the brim. Now we're going to work along the side, the left side of the brim portion only. So we did the 9 rows. We're not going to work in to the last row that we just slip stitched in, but we need to work 1 single crochet that corresponds with each row across. So that will be 8 single crochets down up to the band. And then when we come around, you will work the exact same number going across the other side of the brim, not counting that 9th final row. Okay? So we slip stitched, we did not fasten off, so go ahead into the very next stitch, and you will need to go through all 4, because we had double strands, so we have 2 loops in the front loop and 2 loops in the back loop. Make sure you go through all those and try not to catch your yarn. Single crochet. Okay. Yeah, I accidentally fastened off, so I had to tie on my strands again. Oops. Oh, if you accidentally do that, you can just tie them back on, weave them in. Okay, so that's 1, and then into that big wad of yarn below that, go through both if you can. Sometimes it may or may not work, but do your best. Alright, there's 2. Okay, and then into that little space, the next stitch, 3, the next section of double strands, 4, and then the next space below that, 5, next double strands, 6, next space, 7, the next double strand, and there's your 8th. Okay, and then we are going to place 1 single crochet in each stitch thereafter. Right, so there is the top. We did the 5 rows of single crochet for the band. And skip over this portion, okay, because if you put 1 in here, that's going to make it too bunchy. If you need to, if the stitches are too spaced out, too much of a gap, and you can see it stretching on them, then you can put an extra stitch in. If you need to, just make sure when you go around to the other side you do the same number. Okay, so we go right into the stitch, last row of the band, and place 1 single crochet in each of those, and then in each stitch all the way around. Okay. All the way around the hat. And by not placing an extra single crochet in between the band and the brim, it kind of smooths and rounds out this edge a little bit, so you don't have like an extra hump here when it's all said and done and finished. Alright, so just go ahead, crochet all the way around. Make sure you don't accidentally crochet into that slip stitch between the first and the last coming around where you slip stitch to join. Okay, and then when you come up the other side, you do the same as we did on this left side. You work up your band, and then you do your 8 stitches, single crochets into that every double yarn section, and then the space in between. And then you would slip stitch to join in your beginning single crochet, and do not single crochet across the front brim of the hat. It's going to make it too wide, because we do have one more finishing round to do, too long, and then it's going to add weight to it and cause it to droop down a little bit. Unless you're working in a lighter number 4 with a yarn that isn't very dense and you feel that the brim is coming out a little short, then you can go ahead and work across the front also to give you that bit of extra length. Okay, so I'm going to work all of my single crochets. So I will meet you back up the other side of the brim, and I think we'll just work that together. Okay, I'll see you there. Now here I am on the right side of the brim, and because it's opposite direction, working up versus working down the other side, you'll just have to fit evenly 8 single crochets up, 2 but not in the stitch marker. Right, so I'm going to skip the top right here of the last row of the band, and then work into the very next double stranded section, 1 single crochet, and then 1 in right next to it, because if I skip over and go into this space, it's going to be way too wide of a gap. I can already tell that by looking at it. Okay, now I'm going to work into the space and then into the next double strand. I lost track here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then into the next space 5, the next double strand 6, the next little space 7, and the very last double strand 8. So if you noticed, we came down the other side when I worked in the double strand, it was more at the top portion, because we're working at the opposite end. Then I work into the double strand that's below rather than at the top when we came down this way. Okay, working up this way, so it fits better into just below that little portion here, which was our slip stitch, where we did not chain 1. We were doing our decreases on the edge. Right, and then now you can slip stitch into that very first single crochet. All right, now you can either fasten off both, or you can decide which color. We're going to work in single strand now, 1 strand. So you can decide which color you want to use for your border color. I think I am going to work back to the solid, and if you have a third color you want to do as a contrasting, of course you can do that, but you would need to fasten off and then pick a non-conspicuous place to join, some place where you're not going to visibly see that real well. We're going to have as much of a seamless join as possible, but there's still a seam somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to cut my variegated yarn. So To secure the strand we just cut, I'm going to yarn over, pull through the single strand only, get a hold of, cinch that down, see, kind of tucked right inside, so that's secure. Now I can go back into the loop of the single strand of the solid color I want to use for my trim without having to cut both and start all over again. So now all I'm going to do is a reverse single crochet all the way around, and I like to begin with the chain one just to get that little extra space, to cover that little extra distance when shifting your work into the opposite direction. And then I'm just going to reverse single crochet into the same stitch, and in each stitch all the way around. And if you haven't done a lot of the reverse single crochets, just make sure you do have to elongate that stitch a little bit. Otherwise you're going to tug your work. So don't want it loose and sloppy, but not overly tight either. And if you're a little bit of a tight crocheter, you can certainly go up a hook size if you like. Alright, so this is all I'm going to do all the way around. Is one reverse single crochet into every stitch around. I will meet you back at the beginning and then show you how I join for a more invisible connection. Okay, see you there. Oh, and when you finish the left side of your brim and you're working across the front, you do have that little slip stitch in between the two single crochets where we joined. So you can you can decide which you like best. You can either reverse single crochet in to that slip stitch like I just did and make that fit. And if it's too much, then you can take that out and just skip over it and work directly into the single crochet. And I know it would have been easier crochet wise to have worked a single crochet here instead of a slip stitch, but it looked better with the slip stitch because it gives a nice curve around the edge and just softens it instead of having a hard square corners. You can see what I mean there. So I went ahead and worked into it, and that just might depend on how thick or thin the yarn you're using, how much it compresses, or how dense it is. You know, all those factor into it. So that way you have a couple of different ways to decide on how you like your finished look. Okay, so yes, you do work across the entire brim for this last finishing round. I am almost there. Okay, I am back around to the right side of the last finishing round where I began. So I have 2 stitches left. This is where we began. So I'm going to reverse single crochet in the stitch before and into this first stitch because the stitch leans to the right, so if I stop here there's going to be a gap in between the two. So reverse single crochet into the stitch where we began, and there is the very first stitch. So then now I can fasten off and leave enough to sew in. I'm going to just pull the strand through. I'm not going to knot that. Then I take my yarn with my yarn needle and I'm going to fit it through the strands right through here of the stitch to the right, and then go back behind that. Then you can bring it up if you want through the stitch to the right a little bit, doing these loops here. If you need to get this to also lean to the right and blend in with the other stitches, you can bring it on up through to the front and then down to the back again, where you won't be able to see it. Not through the stitch here, that's part of your brim, but through the reverse single crochet next to it, but from the now front to back, because you went back to front and through, and then now you want to go front to back, and then you can turn it and then weave in both your ends as usual. And because the second strand, when we had the two strands together and we cut one off and that's kind of hanging out there, there is a little knot. Remember, we did yarn over, make a little knot inside, and then I would just weave that on through several places, back and forth as usual, just to make sure that's nice and secure, and then do that with all the rest. And I'm going to weave mine off camera, but I'm going to zoom out and show you how you can reshape this a little bit. If you can see, some of the space is a little bit too much on that very first row of the brim where we worked in the front loop only. You can just do a little wiggling and stretching and manipulating that yarn. Sometimes I need to do that depending on the type of yarn I'm using, especially when I'm working my summer baseball cap in the mercerized cotton. That becomes a little bit more visible, but in a yarn like a wool where you may have, or acrylic even, that has a little bit of a halo, has a little more fuzz to it, versus a very tight, that mercerized cotton where it's more string-like and you don't get any of that loftiness to it, then it's more visible. So for this, I think it blends very, very nicely. But then on the brim, you can just shape it how you like that. You can adjust it. Where the increases are, you can just work those a little bit in the same way. You can block it if you like to, a light blocking. And when it's on your head, okay, I just take my thumb and my forefinger and I pinch them together, pinch and shape, pinch and shape. Don't overstretch it, but if you just pinch it and shape it, once it's on your head how you like it, it will stay. It will keep its shape due to the construction, the way we created this. And so I just smooth, flatten out the edges just a little, shape them just a bit once I'm all finished and my ends are sewn in. Okay, and then when it is stored, I would not fold that in half whether you're storing it for the season or just popping it in your bag and packing it away, because then you're going to get a weird crease down the center of the brim. So I would either store it flat like that, see, and then you can stretch the brim out a little bit more if you like. Okay, I would store it flat, or you can roll it like that and pop it in your bag. Well, I certainly hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. It's a good fit, wears really well, lasts a very long time. All right, well, take care, my fiber friends. Stay well, be safe, and as always, have a little fun, and I will see you again soon. Okay, bye for now.